As the production of Castle in the Sky finished, Ghibli's future was undecided. Many of the staff had already left to help another alumni. The summer heat washed over the studio. Miyazaki was tired and exhausted. In a passing glance towards Takahata, he says, "You'll direct the next one, and I'll just draw." Miyazaki was ecstatic with this idea, but Takahata rejected that. He didn't want to be Miyazaki's middleman. The director always makes those kind of comments after a project. Well, that is until he locks in on the next one. Totoro, an idea that took him back all the way to 1975. A young girl stood by a bus stop in the rain alongside a special guest. A magical adventure awaited. Miyazaki pitched Totoro as a special for television, but it was rejected several times. One version started with a wild concept of a tribe of Totoros at war with humans. Until the tribe was all but wiped out, their spirits remained. That didn't seem to make it to this 1987 pitch though. But other issues crept back up, like its length. It was only a short movie. It would be difficult to get that into theatres. It also wasn't in the popular genres of things like sci-fi. But maybe they could find a solution. Grave of the Fireflies, another project coming from a rival publisher who wanted to try out new methods of advertising. They joined up with Takuma Shoten, Ghibli's parent company, to fund an animated project based off one of their own novellas. If Totoro couldn't be funded alone, perhaps it could be as a double feature. Such screenings were common in Japan at the time. You have two shorter movies put together to reach theatrical length. According to line producer Eiko Tanaka, the first version of a dual picture had Totoro as a 15-minute short shown before Grave of the Fireflies. But that didn't last long, as both films were approved at around the same length. They wanted Totoro to be roughly 70 minutes long. But how was Studio Ghibli going to produce both films at the same time for the same deadline? That would be really stressful. Head producer Toru Hara was already popping pills at the mere mention of it. Back then, Ghibli was only a small size, a single floor. Its staff were like a gang of mercenaries who disbanded after each mission. While the studio's ambitions were high, they were too small of an operation to do two features in the same building. How would they manage both at the same time? Well, they were going to need to expand their operation, find another building to lease. It couldn't be that far away from Studio One, and it had to be big enough to have all the essentials, and most importantly, it needed to be available by early next year. Where are they going to find a place like that within like 100 meters? Well, as one member was running around the neighborhood, he saw a shining light cast down in front of him. It was a new build, empty and still being furnished. By some miracle, it was owned by the company that leased them their first studio. Starting next March, its second floor would be theirs for an entire year. It became known as Studio 2, where you could see a massive camphor tree outside the window. That stark visual was brought to life in Totoro, and this would be the film's birthplace. In contrast to prior Miyazaki films, there was no explosive action or swashbuckling adventure. Totoro's premise was simple. No violence, no tricks. Just two girls and their father moving to the countryside. An experience of childhood in the time before television as they explore the evergreen fields. The director saw this as a work that the country could be proud of. His prior films were all set in Europe, and he'd yet to create something that could explore the beauty of Japan's four seasons. Totoro was inspired by real-life locations, like Totosawa, or Miyazaki's memories of his youth. This setting would be fundamental to the movie, but Miyazaki's previous art director had already started working on Grave of the Fireflies, so he needed someone new. Well, one man was recommended highly for the job, Kazuo Oga, a disciple of Kobayashi, who was a legendary art director, and how even Miyazaki had worked with Kobayashi once in the past. Originally, Oga didn't think he could join Totoro, as he was painting for Madhouse. Yet Miyazaki still invited him out to discuss the project at a cafe next to the train station. Oga said, "Would it be okay if I just took a look?" His curiosity got the better of him. There aren't many days where you get to see Miyazaki's image boards in person. And as Oga talked to Miyazaki about this project, something spoke to him. I remember thinking, Panda Go Panda was also a world like this. Panda Go Panda was a TV movie that both Miyazaki and Takahata created in the 70s. It was one of Oga's earliest jobs as a background painter. At this time, Oga's recent anime projects were about neon cities, and he longed to return to a more natural setting, something of a period piece. The art director had grew up in a similar location to Totoro as well, which gave him a good grasp of the visuals, and he was already thinking of ways to approach the project. And by the end of the meeting, there was no doubt in his mind that he would be the film's art director, well, as long as he could escape from Madhouse for a bit. At the start of production, both men were discussing how to build the setting. Oga and Miyazaki would go location scouting, a trip to the outskirts of Tokyo, in the back of Nippon Animation. This is the area that inspired some of the earliest image boards for the film. And yet, Oga quickly realized the level at which Miyazaki expected. When we started the actual production, I gathered everyone's backgrounds thinking they would be good enough. Miyazaki-san looked at them with a stern face and said, "Is this your standard, Oga-san?" Oga needed to be dedicated to capture the film's vision. He began to think of flowers, trees as equals to Totoro as he painted them in his mind. Every detail, from the type of plants to the color of the soil of the region, and how that tells the story, were paramount. The process of painting backgrounds at Ghibli wasn't actually that different from the rest of the industry. They used a specific kind of paint known as poster color, or poster paints. What are poster paints? They were a water-based paint that are somewhere in between a watercolor and a gouache. There's a lower opinion of them artistically because they are cheap and they fade over time. They're often used more so in school projects for children, yet Oga could see their appeal. Poster paints could create vibrant pictures once you know how to work with them, and with only a few pots you could mix a variety of colours, and the right mixtures could easily emulate the look of watercolours. While poster paints were also much more forgiving. Because they were less opaque, you could cover up your mistakes. At the beginning of the Ghibli process, it always starts with the director's image boards, which are the foundation of which they construct the setting. A thick piece of paper is chosen for the background, which is then wet on both sides. Then by using a flat brush and a diluted amount of poster paint, they would start to capture these loose and flowing strokes that were impressionistic. The base level of the painting needed to be completed before the paper dries. So they had about an hour, which added a level of unpredictability to the outcome. After that base layer is complete, the artist would switch to a pointed brush. Now the canvas is dry, the way the paint would move is different. You had more control. This is where they would add darker and defined areas. For the final sets of details, things like colour pencils and inks were added on top. It could take hours to complete just one of these. The idea would be to capture the essence of a location opposed to a complete reality, using detail to draw the viewer's eye throughout the canvas. These paintings may not be on screen for long, but they did help define the movie's atmosphere. And that's not to mention the project would be projected on a massive screen. It was very different from television. Every imperfection would be on show. And there's hundreds of backgrounds to paint, so Oga needed to assemble a team and teach them the methods to create backgrounds that would work on a big screen. His in-house team was only 6 members, but when you compare that to the animation team, it seems kind of small. After all, to complete Totoro, they needed about 50,000 drawings. So is each studio going to have to fight for its staff? Well, not really. The staff were basically allocated to the jobs that seemed to suit them the most, but there were a couple of exceptions to that, including the colorist Yasuda, who, while ended up working on Grave of the Fireflies, did all the core colors for Totoro and then left other staff to fill in the rest. But then Miyazaki lost a big battle for animation director. He wanted Yoshifumi Kondo, but ultimately he joined the Grave of the Fireflies team. The head producer, Toraharu, had to mitigate this battle, and because of that, Miyazaki was unhappy. So to compromise, Kondo would offer Miyazaki his protege Sato as animation and character designer. Oga, Sato, and Miyazaki were some of the earliest members to enter the new studio. It was about half the size of the previous one, with 3 big tables that sat each department of staff. Yeah, that's a cozy setup, but there was no time to admire it because the storyboarding had only just begun, and this picture would be coming out in under a year. Miyazaki was going to need to hurry. It was only a few months until the animators actually arrived. This is the Miyazaki method of drawing up the film's production and steaming ahead. Currently he's young and fast, so he's going to be fine drawing up the rest of it in the next few months. Yet the schedule as a whole would be a concern. So Totoro had to change Ghibli's approach going forward by introducing a checking system, which involves each animator given a part of the storyboard, and then Miyazaki will explain to them what they're animating in the cut and what he expects. So as an example, let's take Miyazaki's own protege, Endo. The first step is him making his own layout. No, Endo, you can't just blow up the storyboard on a photocopier. Only Canada is allowed to do that. Endo must use the storyboard to construct a scene. The layout is the spine of the animation, and it combines the background and the characters. The focus on Ghibli is often about how the characters will move through the frame. So after Endo has created the basics of this shot, next Miyazaki will check over the cut and see the timing of the acting, and then he'll give corrections. It's said that Miyazaki changed over 80% of the animation timing while producing the film. Oh god, so it seems we have a problem. No matter how many times Miyazaki corrects Endo's cut and sends it back, it keeps reverting back to Endo's style. Yeah, Endo knows it's going to get hot and difficult real soon, but none of this is making it any easier. And Miyazaki might get mad. You know, he starts handing out warning cards if you're not careful. The director's standards are very high, and sometimes it seems like the only correct way to do the cut is the one in his head. There we go. Now that's down. It's up to Endo to redraw it in full and give his animation to the animation director Sato, who will check and correct for any of the characters looking off model. And once that's approved, the key animation will start bouncing between every other department in the studio to get it all to that big picture standard. So there's a lot of back and forth, yes, but by doing it all as the production is moving, it creates less problems at the end, when staff will be rushing to deadline. The quicker things can be sent to be painted and filmed, the better, really. Going back to Masaaki Ando, He's one of the few key animators at the studio on this project, and yes, he got some flack there, but Miyazaki once said of him, Endo's talent was attempting any type of cut that's sent to him without hesitation, and because of that he has versatility, and that's why he was entrusted the opening moving sequence of the film, which just so happens to have one of the hardest cuts in the entire length of Totoro. Cut 13 and cut 14. The bouncing of the bike and the luggage on the back of a small truck as it goes downhill. Not only is it about keeping the shapes consistent as they move, but you also have to make it turn in perspective. There's a lot of extra items on the back as well to keep in check. I would not like to do it myself. There was no CGI back then, and Miyazaki wasn't going to let them use any video reference to assist. So it was going to be really tough, even if it took him months. But they also knew they only had 8 months to animate the entire picture, so they couldn't have many sequences that were this tough, or they'll never hit deadline. Totoro is said to have 3 particularly hard cuts, and those cuts took longer than any sequence in Cast in the Sky. The other 2 were entrusted to a special animator, Makiko Futaki, who had unparalleled skills in capturing nature and animals. These cuts were a pond full of tadpoles. It would need to be intricate with lots of drawn frames. Once more, the tadpoles had 4 layers of colour, which Futaki would have to set herself. The cut included different types of timing and separate elements. The majority of the tadpoles were drawn on ones, as in 24 drawings a second, and the entire sequence was probably about 500 drawings, which might not get across the effort involved here without seeing it. There's at least 50 tadpoles for every drawing, and they're all moving fast. Even processing how to approach that task seems inconceivable. The staff knew this would also take a long time, and a lot of heavy collaboration, while also moving one of their best animators off the schedule. When asked about Futaki's perspective on animated challenges, she said,
"When I'm doing difficult key animation, no matter the film, I always think I've had enough. When things aren't going well, my spirits gradually sink. I'm thinking that I can't do it. I wonder if I shouldn't stop. Immediately as I finish drawing, I think, I can do it, and repeat. If you can't stand that feeling, you cannot continue to do this job."
Futaki was praised by how the final tadpole cut captured the illusion of life. She used her own memories of her childhood playing in ponds to create the scene, and that wasn't the only thing she animated either. She did about 88 cuts in the entire movie. She was able to capture each of them with a grace in ways only she could. Let's take a quick break for a second to thank everyone who supported the channel in the past, by commenting, sharing or hyping these videos. That really helps out. And anyone who's monetarily supported the channel. YouTube has seemed to have changed the systems on the platform recently in such a way where it seems a lot harder to get views than it used to be. They seem to be more emphasizing shorts over long form content, especially with how they recommend stuff. So really, any support is basically essential at this point. So I have to thank anyone who does, especially my patrons. And those patrons are Illy, Scarf, Defox, Gambaroni, Evan Reeves, Lloyd Miller, Lenny, Tim James Richards, Chunks, Fox Mulder, Paul, Steven's Mum, Systematic, Karen, Doji, Yegor, Vic Boss, DTB, Aleph, Mickey Moon, Pedro Ferreira, RG Palmer, Kitty Cat, Oscar Britton, Luger, Ian Laser, Curtis, Alexander Sofronoff, Axel GT, Sat, Ferry Curry, Mel, J Buck, and all my other patrons. Thank you very much, and let's get back to the video. Totoro focused on a simple story with few conflicts. There's the mother who's sent to the countryside. She's ill and she's recuperating. Much of this seems to be around the healing power of nature, an ode to plants, trees, and what lies deep within the forest. The screen is filled with detail in the vegetations, stuff like the acorns, which are a symbol of Jomon culture. Going back thousands of years in Japan, they were seen as the life of the forest. And they seem almost forgotten by everyone in the movie but these children. They seem to have an attention to detail and a curiosity. The sisters are so full of innocence as well, and that innocence opens them up to this magical world. In my grandparents' time, it was believed that spirits existed everywhere. In trees, rivers, insects, wells, anything. My generation does not believe this. I like the idea that we should treasure everything because there is a kind of life to everything. The film takes on that Shinto philosophy in an era that's lost touch with its past. During the Meiji era, the Japanese government destroyed many shrines throughout Japan, even ones that went back to the birth of Shinto, severing a lot of the connection between spirits and humans. To find really old shrines now, you have to go deep within a forest, and perhaps that is where magic can return. And it is Joe Hisashi's score that accentuates that mystical element. The compositions are pretty simple, but that's one of its strengths. It's not always a big orchestra. When it comes to these magical sequences, it's the electronic music of the Fairlight that emphasizes them, which is a musical instrument that could create and record small samples, and then you'd play them back on its keyboard. The Fairlight truly was the sound of the 80s. This actually adds light percussion next to sampled chants, interspersed with a few keys to pique the audience's interest. It recalls some of Japanese ambient music, which also associates itself with the natural world through its choice of imagery and the ambient sounds of wildlife. The minimalistic electronic sound does create a contrast in the movie with other sequences, which use a big orchestra to create a very playful energy, often while using old school techniques here like Mickey Mousing. They use the music to emphasize May's comedic movements. The Fairlight's job seems to be to enchant the audience. It makes things mysterious and almost ominous at times. Though Totoro as a whole is a movie where the music is few and far between, Miyazaki went out of his way to cut back the amount used. To really feel the nature, you have to be able to hear it. And sometimes the best choice is no music at all. How else can you capture these different sides of nature even? Totoro isn't just about it being a great healer, but also kind of scary. When the storm winds are blowing hard enough to rattle and shake the roof, it's scary for the kids. There's an actual danger present that kind of accentuates how vulnerable people are to the elements. It's powerful indifference. This sequence was handled by Yoshinori Kaneda. He's quite a famous animator, known for his action cuts. So while he does get a few of those sort of magical sequences in Totoro, one of his major cuts here is closer to everyday life. In general, this movie is not the type of work he's associated with, but everyone on the staff loved him and wanted him around, because he was cheerful and kind, and he really boosted people's morale, which meant that the studio gave him a lot of leeway. You needed to be on time at Ghibli, or you'd get fined, but Kaneda wasn't the type to do that, so he would just stuff the late jar with notes on day one and leave it there. Nor was Kaneda the type to read the whole storyboard. He only read his sections, and the staff even let him use that storyboard to photocopy and turn into a layout. The Totoro project actually changed how Kaneda's animation would be handled at the studio. Prior movies, they tried to not correct him too much as to leave his uniqueness in the animation, but here is a lot less visible. Allegedly, animation director Sato had corrected his cuts to uniform them with the rest of the film, and I can't say I'm surprised because when you look at his layouts, they're not even close to on model for the girls. Still, it seems Miyazaki was happy with Kaneda's work in the film. In particular, I think this cat bus animation is great. They play to his strengths, fast movement, using perspective animation and speed. Not to mention the compositions are fantastic. They have such a flow and even a fisheye lens sense of reality. The cat bus and Totoro are both these mythical creatures, and they don't appear until later in the film, and not much either. They really only appear when the girls are alone. Totoro is almost a surrogate parental figure to these girls in the time when they're basically without, giving them protection and guidance. As Miyazaki once said, Totoro lives in the hearts of children. During the production, the cat bus was immensely popular with the staff. Even if it barely appeared, it piqued their interest, and perhaps its limited appearances give it an even further magical, alluring quality. Many staff wanted to draw the cat bus, but few animators would get the chance. They had to live up to Miyazaki's absurd standards. People like Kondo or Kaneda. It wasn't just about his standards though, it was about wanting artists to have a keen sense of observation. To animate is to observe after all. And the things Miyazaki would pick out from his own observations were absurd. Just by looking at Endo's drawings, Miyazaki deduced his glasses prescription was incorrect. When Miyazaki wanted to draw something, he studied it meticulously, and he expected nothing less than excellence in motion. During the production, he famously told a wild bird that they were flying incorrectly. So while Totoro may have little action, there was a ton of character acting throughout, and Miyazaki was concerned that the staff's approach lacked nuance. Animators were applying the basic run cycle taught in most studios, the basic pose to pose. There's a set pattern in the animation, 4 steps a second on twos, which creates an optical illusion of movement. Although this illusion left Miyazaki a bit ashamed, he really wanted to go beyond patterns. After all, the way a 4-year-old might run is different than a 10-year-old. Miyazaki often told those under him to learn from reality. It's not about perfectly replicating it, but to understand the motion, to add nuance and imperfection to the things that move. What does it say about the character and their personality? The process would take a mixture of learning, observation, and technique, which is why Miyazaki ran a lecture on character movement during the movie for all the animation staff. Naturalistic movement became priority, as they wanted to create authentic children that the audience could believe. The conclusion of these lectures also came with field trips, letting staff go to learn from real children and draw from observation. And yeah, there was about 11 or so key animators who were really good, but there was also a ton of in-betweeners at Ghibli at this point, and they needed to be up to the task to actually properly finish the film. I think Futaki's animation really is a great example of this concept. May's movements are neither uniform or standardized. She trips and stumbles, she moves around at different paces, depending on her excitement or emotion. There's little imperfections added there, and sometimes it's close to life, but then it can just transition into something over the top and cartoony. The movie was basically a sprint the whole way through its production. While the boards were finished in October, the movie had basically expanded from 70 minutes to 77 minutes to then 86 minutes. And we're talking about a fairly small crew here that didn't think it could actually hit deadline at this point, so the tensions were brewing in the studio. The animation director around this point was saying that they needed to do about 7 cuts a week, but they were only getting done about 4. They were lacking behind, even though he was staying up until the middle of the night every day to try and keep things together. Which meant that they basically needed to get subcontracting studios on board to finish this movie in time. Which is exactly what they did. By December they brought those in, and by January it seemed like most things were together, thank God. But there were still a couple sequences which weren't planned for, including not even having storyboards. The opening included a special song to capture the spirit of youth and fun, and took inspiration from some of Miyazaki's earlier projects. But they needed an animator they could really trust to follow Miyazaki's instructions. And that discussion led to only one person, Shinji Otsuka. He was one of the trusted few to animate the cat bus. He was fast and damn good, no one else could compare. He'd already done about 99 cuts on the project. Otsuka has been described as a quiet, gentle hermit, and a master in his own right. And I gotta say, he absolutely killed it on the opening, giving the animation this sort of parade-like feeling, which had a rhythm and rhyme to it all as they march on. Now there's one question left. Who would draw the ending pictures? 18 selected images to show the girl's mother returning through the credits. Well, Miyazaki stepped up to the plate. However, the director still had a ton of work to do, so the drawings he actually handed in were basically sketches, more than finished art. Which actually meant it was Sato's job to finish it. Sorry, Sato. That's just how it is. By the end of February, all the animation cuts were complete, leaving it to the color department to finish off the last parts of the film. This is where the new method became quite important, because of these sort of high-intensity productions, especially because they wanted to channel new methods with Totoro, which had to be enhanced through the use of line work. The entire film would change the color of the main line work to a sort of brown using carbon paper. This would change the photocopied black to a different color to be on screen. The brown would offer a softness to the characters in Totoro, though it was not used for hard machinery. Some characters like Totoro would use a mixture of both to stand out. Nowadays, it wouldn't take much to change the color of a line work, you can simply fill it in on a computer. But back then it took a lot of extra steps, while also costing twice as much as black lines. Yet they were still able to do all this while hitting their deadline. The new method was a success and changed the way Ghibli would approach projects going forward. Totoro's production was considered as a pretty nice, happy time for a lot of the staff members who had rosy recollections of it. There was a lot of laughter and fun in the studio, and sometimes it got so loud the art department had to tell the animators, you gotta chill out a little bit, we're under a lot of stress. Someone like Kihara has also said that it was a time where he didn't see Miyazaki shout a single time. Everyone was so happy. Of course, I don't know if that's 100% true, because there's certainly some stories where Miyazaki was gonna chew some people out if they, misplaced his pencil, or if they weren't together on their cuts. But I digress. It does feel a bit like your position on the production and how you felt about it might depend on your role, but someone like line producer Eiko Tanaka was really stressed out, and she was losing clumps of hair by the day, just trying to sort everything out and keep the production together. But that Ghibli could create 86 minutes of animation in under a year, not once but twice in the same year, that was really impressive. Unfortunately, it didn't pay off at the box office. Reports are that about 800,000 people saw the double feature, and it made maybe around 580 million yen that year. The film ran 35 days in the cinema, and followed up with a second screening of Totoro in August. These numbers were not considered a success. Each of the Ghibli films at this point had actually seen diminishing returns in the box office. I mean, it wasn't a great idea to begin with to put these two films together, even if it couldn't be helped. The horrors of war just aren't the flavour you want next to Totoro's lighter fun. There was also no guarantee which film would be shown first when you got to see it at the cinema. As Miyazaki once said, none of our films at Ghibli's up to Totoro were able to make back their budget simply from theatrical releases. We earned the black through secondary rights. Totoro would need a miracle to turn it around, but they were playing the long game. The film had an acclaim by those in the industry and outside. Totoro won many anime awards, and it was loved by audiences who actually did see it, including Miyazaki's own mentor, Yosuji Mori, who talked about how it made him cry. That's not to mention Totoro's unexpected champion, Akira Kurosawa, the famous Japanese film director, who also called it one of his favourite movies of all time. Miyazaki and him later appeared on television to discuss filmmaking in a sort of promotion interview. As word of mouth travelled, Totoro's secondary rights started to change everything for Ghibli. For those who'd missed the theatrical run, it was actually broadcast on Nippon TV in 1989, 1990, and 1991, and it became incredibly successful there, not only getting some of the station's best broadcast ratings at the time. It continued to be broadcast on that station regularly all the way to the present day. Public awareness of Totoro grew, and so did the home sales, even seeing a direct bump in rentals after the broadcast. By the new millennium, it was the second highest selling animated movie in the Japanese Oricon book, only topped by Ghibli's own Princess Mononoke. And then there was the merchandise. During the production of the film, they created a limited set of plushies, but they didn't look quite right. But then 2 years after, when Totoro started gaining popularity, they were actually approached by a toy manufacturer, and they started a line of plushies which became a mega success, selling an unspeakable ton of merchandise. There was a universality to Totoro that goes through many generations, it seems. A sort of return to a nicer, simpler time, which definitely seemed like it could be an appealing message during a time of uncertainty coming up with the market crash just hitting Japan and people being not so sure where they're going. You know, that modern industrial living hasn't done them so well, so maybe looking back to nature and sort of easier, soothing times was alluring, especially to those who wanted to advertise the movie, like at Nippon TV. And among a bunch of other factors coming all at once, somehow Totoro went from a middling failure to the face of the company. And I mean literally, it became the logo for the studio. Since Porco Rosso, that picture has been in front of every movie. Producer Suzuki said in an interview that it was the merch of Totoro which kept Studio Ghibli alive. And its success went beyond borders. The first American release of Totoro under Troma Film was a surprise hit, selling over 600,000 copies. Decades later, we know that Totoro has sold millions of home releases all over the world, and still makes billions of yen every year from its merchandise. Then, Totoro holds a special place in Ghibli's history. It's one of the few projects who actually got itself a direct sequel, directed by Miyazaki. The short film, May and the Kitty Bus, made exclusively to get people to go to the museum, an enticing offer for tourists and locals. It doesn't stop there. Ghibli allowed for the creation of a few stage plays based on their works. Among them, Totoro, which premiered in England. A show that was so popular that it was brought back and has been extended for its time on the West End. People seem to still be invested in Totoro decades later. It's still polled in Japan as one of their favourite Ghibli movies of all time. But it wasn't just about popularity or profits. Miyazaki really made the movie because he wanted to get kids outside and run around and plant acorns and sort of have fun. He wanted to sort of bring attention to the ecological side, about the dangers and the destruction caused by Japanese industrialization, thinking about processes to reforest or greenify spaces, which he's been talking about for years in different books. And you can say the popularity of the film unintentionally impacted those goals. In Miyazaki's district, Totosawa, it's been using those locations to do marketing campaigns for tourism and use that revenue to then fund restoration and conservational projects. Totoro had changed so much for the studio in ways they could never have predicted that Miyazaki almost seems a bit bothered about it, since it's so popular, saying stuff like, "People should really only be watching it on my birthday once a year. They're all watching it too many times." And that, dear viewers, is what we call suffering from success.